This is the future of Africa. In this program, we focus on Horn of Africa's political, economic, and socio-cultural aspects. Let's share our vision, hopes, and professional critics. All views are esteemed. Stay with us. Dr. Ebisa, welcome to this program.
Thank you, Dr. Hussein, for having me back.
Thank you. Dr. Ebisa is a human rights advocate, and today we'll be having discussion on a number of issues. And to start with, Dr. Ebisa, as you know, Ethiopia and the OROMIA regional state have been undergoing grave challenges. There are wars, corruption, inflation, drought, starvation, and a lot of things. The challenges have been aggravated by a web of factors, as you know, and among others, the recent turbulences in the Orthodox Church is the case in point. How do you see what's happening in terms of the Orthodox Church in relation to the Oromo region and Oromia as a whole, Oromia Synod, of all with respect to the right to use, for instance, our language?
Definitely. Thank you. This is a fundamental question because the Ethiopian Orthodox Church had played a fundamental role going back in history, and it's important to highlight those history and analyze the current reform or uprising within the church that has taken place by the Oromo leaders. And the Orthodox Church has been peace and partial of this Ethiopian empire. And even going back, it's important to maybe touch upon the overview of the history of what the Orthodox Church had gone through. So if we look at prior to Ethiopia, even within the Abyssinian history, there has been revolt against the Orthodox Church. We can mention, for instance, Yodit Gudet way back in history where she had revolted against the church because they have begun to interfere with the government and society. And recently also we can look at Tedros who have gone after the clergy of the church because they have become very difficult to govern the state in a way that is champions diversity and welcomes the entire society. So the church has been really had a strong hold on the state even pre-Ethiopia and Abyssinian state. So we can see a revolution even in the Abyssinian society against this church. And so when we come forward to today, for instance, during Mengistu Haile Mariam, there were also clashes within the church because the church could not accommodate and take a leading role in the changes that was coming, demand that was coming from the population. And so there was clashes, even though that was a communist governance, but there was some tremendous influence in preventing needed changes in Ethiopia from taking place. And now when we come to in the past 15 years under the TPLF regime, there was also clashes. And now what we see currently under the current administration, the Oromo clergy, the Oromo faith leaders have come up and requesting the church to diversify and to accept the entire Ethiopian people and to allow the Ethiopian people to worship in their own language, to their culture be respected. And what we have seen then, this tremendous reaction by the church, for me, it was shocking for the very fact that the Oromo clergymen, the Oromo people have demanded to use their language, to use their culture, to be incorporated in this Orthodox church. When we see this type of reaction, it's very shocking. I mean, it's even when Eritrea seceded, we have not seen this kind of reaction among the church followers. And Tigray had recently left the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. We have not seen such a reaction. So this reaction points to, when it comes to Oromo issue, when Oromo raises a fundamental question to reshape, so it's like a church renaissance. What the Oromo leaders, the archbishops, warriors have done is basically like Martin Luther King. He's using the church not only for faith, to also enhance, to bring peace and stability. And the fact that the Orthodox Church have not welcomed these changes and continue to be a roadblock in this change will be challenging and also will need to be hammered out. And I think that the position that they have taken to reform the churches It's historical, and in fact, some Oromo thinkers and leaders have pointed out what the Papas or Suarios have done is similar to what Tadasaburu has done in 1974 when he realized the discrimination that was taking place against the Oromo and defected and stood on the right side of history. And so this is what we are seeing today. So the church has been a tremendous influence in Ethiopian history, and in fact has become an obstacle to a real progress in change in Ethiopia.
Thanks so much. The church has tremendous challenges, problems in that regard. It's not about using old language only, and that's why quite a number of people argue that the Orthodox Church clergies have been dominating the entire political and the economic system of the nation over years, because the attachment of the church with the state have been strong. And they also assert that under the banner of the Orthodox Church, the clergy's primed and the established structures have been in favor of one nation, one language, one culture, and one flag. And how do you see this?
I think this is essentially what the problem in Ethiopia was from its inception. The church has stood on the side of the empire, has stood on the side of dictatorship throughout history, and have become the heart of the Ethiopian empire. And that is where a lot of the ideology comes from the church writing, going back. For instance, a lot of ideology that today manifested to the political sphere of the Ethiopianist or the other group comes from this church. Now, what the church does that's very important to understand is, we can cite some examples. For instance, Oromo had come from Madagascar, the 16th century migration of Oromo. This is all comes from the church's ideology and teaching, and that is incubated in there, and that's then brought down to the public. And the public now believes Oromo has come from outside of the African continent and traveled to Ethiopia. And this is the essence, because if the church leads through faith, by using faith, and disseminates a wrong ideology, that is very difficult and challenging for people to come live in peace. When you spread this kind of ideology using church, using the Bible, using faith, and disseminate a phobia, hate speech against a larger group or any group for that matter, becomes very difficult. And what you are seeing today, this reaction, overblown reaction within the church, is the church comes up with this ideology. In fact, the expansion, land grabbing by the church, first is incubated within the church. They come up, for instance, the Barar ideology, or for instance, renaming of other Oromo cities, for instance, into a biblical city, in claiming that that is no longer an Oromo city, it is actually their city, and so they need it back. So today, the ideology or the Amara nationalism that's based on expansion of land, territorial claim, is completely tied to the church's philosophy and ideology. And this is where the clash we are seeing today, and the fact that the church is against the federal structure, for instance. Progress is where the heart of this Ethiopian empire exists. And the last vestige, the last remaining of the Ethiopian empire is located within this church. Unless this church comes up and accepts, the entire Ethiopian people with their culture, look at it, and actually has to grow beyond this control by only one ethnic group, and take diversity, the real diversity, into account, it will be very difficult. As the church leaders have said, over 15 million churchgoers have defected from the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. So you're beginning to see a trend where even people who follow the faith are beginning to resist by non-compliance, by not going to church, by not cooperating with the church. This is translating into a political movement. And so what the Oromo leaders right now have been doing is actually two things. One, their approach to reforming the church needs to be taken seriously and supported by the government, because when an institution is controlled by one ethnic group predominantly, it leads to such disparity, such injustice, such a discrimination arises, because one group controls the institution, but you seek to govern or live in a multi-diversitional society. When that happens, then it creates a clash. And this philosophy where the church is the state is the church, philosophy is actually very dangerous in the 21st century. Unless we quickly move away from this, we will have some very difficult time in accepting democracy, peace, and progress.
Thanks so much. Let's see the other aspect of it. I call that the other fallacy or flawed reason. For instance, the Orthodox clergies tend to explain that Orthodox Church is a nation by itself. I'm not sure if Orthodox Church by itself is a nation or not. If questions such as the questions raised by the Oromo Synod will lead, if it is handled or properly addressed, it will lead to the nation to disintegration. So the concern is disintegration of the nation. Personally, from your experience, do you see any association between using Afan Oromo and the possibility of disintegration of the nation? Or how do you see the fallacy of equating Orthodox Church with the nation itself? How about the other religions? How about the other, even people who don't have any kind of religion in that country?
Right, it's a mistake. And especially for a country like Ethiopia, a society is not founded or it's not based on one religion, as they have claimed. What we are evolving into a multi-nation democracy. So their claim that, the church is the state, and whenever a challenge arises against the church, Ethiopia disintegrates. This is absolutely a fallacy. A fallacy. Why? If Oromo uses its language, for instance, they claim that it will lead to disintegration or is going to create a problem. They say the same thing with democracy. Democracy is not necessary in Ethiopia. They oppose the federal structure, for instance. What they say is through their own propaganda is federalism leads to disintegration of the country, and that's proven wrong. In fact, federalism, the fact that you allow nationalities to respect their culture and they be able to govern in their own state, actually have strengthened Ethiopia. And somehow, if the federal structure were not implemented and Ethiopia had not accepted this multinational federalism, Ethiopia would have gone or would have disintegrated by now. What we are seeing today at the larger scale, the problem in Ethiopia, for instance, the war between Tigray and the central government is the federal question. What the Oromo society is asking on the other side is also a federal question. So when you have a church that has a large following, that's ingrained within the Ethiopian government and able to influence the Ethiopian government, not to implement the constitution, not to allow what the constitution guarantees its nationalities, interferes with that, then we are beginning to see where is this church going? Is it for Ethiopian people? Is it for progress? Or is there an agenda that's only benefit one ethnic group over the rest of Ethiopian people? So this is a fallacy. Ethiopia will exist whether the church is there or not. It's up to the Ethiopian people. But this is a huge fallacy, and we have not seen a state. We have seen many countries who started out as a religious country have progressed into multinational countries. We can look at the West. We can look at many countries. Church is important in the life of the society, but it cannot govern as a multinational society where large number of Muslim faith is followed, where Wakafana is there, where different faiths are practiced, and one church claiming to be the leader, or there are no other faith, and if Orthodox is Ethiopia and the rest are not, this is very dangerous. It will lead to conflict and instability in the Ethiopian people, especially the follower of Orthodox Church. And the reason I'm speaking out against this is because culturally I'm a follower of the Orthodox Church, and as I see the danger, the direction it's going, and it needs to play now a positive role. The emperor time, the attempt to return or monopolize the state's power by church or through church by certain group must end now, and we're moving forward with the modern state of Ethiopia.
Thank you. It's not only fallacy, it's a miscalculation or wrong calculation to equate one religion with the nation itself. We can't equate that way. I mean, the Orthodox Church is there, the Orthodox religion, Islam is there, Protestant is there, Waqifata is there, the Adventist 7 days is there. I mean, people who might not have religion could be there. So equating from the very start, equating one religion with a nation is a fallacy by itself. Not only fallacy, it's a wrong calculation. So I think that's going to be destructive for the nation itself unless treated well. Let's move to the other part of our discussion. From the beginning in our introduction, we raised about web of challenges, problems, turbulences, war, inflation, corruption, the drought, what have you. Now, let's single out one of these aspects, that's war in Oromia. As you know, extensive war, continued war is there in Oromia. I mean, first it was started in Wallagga, Gujen, Borana, then moved to Tigray, and now in Oromia. And as you know, recently the president of Oromia regional state has inclined to call a peace talk with OLA. How do you see that call?
I think it shows that the push that the Oromo people have done for the Oromia regional government to bring an end to war in Oromia and to accept peace. And Ola's resistance in demanding the fundamental question of Oromo, Oromo question needs to be answered, also pushed the government to make this kind of statement. Now, we don't want this to be just a statement. We want this to be a serious engagement, a serious commitment to peace and stability, because this is not a question that you could simply sweep under or use a political tactic, call for peace and tomorrow not answer, because it's fundamental. What is being asked in Oromia, or the conflict in Oromia, did not just arise because maybe one group is seeking power, the other is not. There's a fundamental question that the Oromia regional government have not addressed, and so this creates conflict. Now, in my view, what needs to happen then is the peace process is great. If you know, we need to push for it, a genuine peace process needs to take place. At the same time, what we need to insert and demand from both party, from Ola or the Oromia regional president, is that they need to be cognizant of Oromo national questions, Oromo interest, what they both agree on. If this party don't come together, if, for instance, Oromia regional president, Oromia regional government, is their failure, is their lack of not implementing what the Oromo people have demanded, not making the Oromo national interest a priority, that's allowing the fighting to go on. So a peace process, on one end, should move forward with the third party, genuine third party in place. At the end of this process, there has to be some kind of resolution to some of the questions that's been raised historically by the Oromo movement and by the Oromo public. The second is, in the meantime, both Ola and the Oromo regional president must come to a consensus on certain Oromo national interest. That needs to happen. The peace process could take a parallel role in the national interest. They need to re-engage and address how peace could come, the economy of the Oromo people, because what we're seeing is not just war now. What has been going on, the war in the last 2 years and the economic downfall have cost the Oromo people life. There's famine, there's a lot of problem throughout the country. And this is the direct result of mismanaging of Oromia. There's their policy that they have implemented is costing them. It also threatened peace and stability in the region, and we are seeing this today. So I call upon the Oromo regional government to take this question seriously and return to their base and seriously ask.
We'll come to that point. Yes, let's look at the response of LA to that call. Basically, we all have been advocating for peace this kind of peace talk, because frequently we just explain that solving political problems through political discussion is essential. Now let's look at OLS respond. They responded to the call by emphasizing that there is a need for third party, the need for the federal government to directly involve in it, and there are also, they tend to question, the official naming itself, because the name used in that call, they tend to claim that it's not their official name. So how do you see these things? Personally, I feel that, okay, there's a need for third party, which is neutral, that's essential, and the involvement, perhaps taking part or to be owner of this initiative by the federal government is equally important with the Oromia government, and the naming itself indicates some kind of underestimation according to their reaction. How do you see this?
Well, what we are seeing is probably the government is trying to use the peace talk as a political or to buy time, and they need to be genuine about it. For instance, we have seen, history have shown, even through OLF, the Ethiopian government have never truly honored a treaty or an agreement that's been signed among different parties. So a third party, a genuine third party, is required to ensure. I mean, we can cite recently when OLF had come back to the country, and that because there was no third party present, and that agreement had fallen. It didn't work. It could have worked if there was a serious engagement by international community or serious third party. At least a lot of the problem that we've seen today would have been mitigated. So a neutral third party that's really interested in peace in the region needs to get involved. And this is the right call, in my view, because the Ethiopian government is not genuine when it comes to, they want to manipulate society. They want to buy time. They want to avoid certain crises. So whenever certain crisis arises, they call for peace. And this has been, our side or the Oromo side is aware that this kind of manipulation is going on. So the third party call is, I believe, it's important. And the engagement with the federal government is also, I believe, it's necessary and it's important, because the issue is dealing with the Ethiopian, the entire Ethiopian government, not just with Oromo regional government. So that needs to take place. The naming part, I wasn't sure what the specific name nomenclature that they've used.
It's Aba Oshani, not Wobo Abao.
Okay, yeah, right. And the Ola doesn't call itself Shani, so this is also shows there is certain group or certain people within the Oromia regional government that doesn't want this peace to go forward, and we need to really investigate that and see who is within the Oromia government or within the current regional state who's truly interested in peace, and those who are against peace, and we need to investigate who they are. And most of them have made public statement against this peace process back a couple of years back. So those individuals that have hold position needs to be questioned in this view.
I think we need to promote peace talk. That's a good start. But at the same time, it is important to appreciate the reaction. It's important to have a third party. It's the involvement of the federal government, or mainly the main actor, as a main actor, because the parliament itself labeled these fighters as terrorists. So they have to reverse that, and the involvement of the federal government as owner with Oromia regional government is again a serious question, and it's important. And the third one is using appropriate naming is also advisable if the thing is genuine. So overall, the call should be genuine, and it should not be to dominate one each other. should be on equal footing and responding to the interest of the people. Well, deep inside, I am personally, let me share you my belief. I believe that the government of Ethiopia, as a whole, and the Oromia regional states in particular, have been failed to respond to the questions of nations and nationalities. For instance, the government of Oromia regional states did fail to respond to the questions raised by the Oromo people, particularly during the youth movement. This means it is in contradiction, in conflict with the entire Oromo people. The government used to kill, imprison, demobilize, discriminate, and denied the rule of law. And over the past 4 years, we have been in real crisis. That's how even the youth, those who involved in peace struggle, just joined the armed force. So in my opinion, the government itself, the regional government, should address the question of its people, the question of nations and nationalities, and the question of the Oromo people. That will solve everything. I think there is a need to settle these catastrophic challenges than ever before. So that's my own belief. How do you see this belief or argument, if you like?
Yeah, and that is the puzzle in this situation, because the youth movement, for instance, was based on protecting the Constitution, asking genuine federal the Constitution to be respected. Now, why the Oromia regional government has not responded in such a democratic ways is really we need to look at a lot of things. One, as we can see now, the very fact that the Oromo Orthodox Church have asked a question and said, we want to teach, we want to use Afan Oromo, we want diversity in this church, we want to be appointed and serve our people in our own language, have generated such a reaction from the institution, from the vast institution in the country. Now, this trickles down to what we're talking about today. There are groups who don't want democracy to come, who want the hegemony, who want the empire to continue in such a direction. I believe those individuals, those who have this kind of mentality, are also within Oromia regional government, preventing genuine federalism from taking place. And this was actually evident during the TPLF time. What was happening? Even though that the TPLF have tried in some ways to bring genuine, not as much, but genuine change, there is also a resistance from the ground up, from bringing change using the federal structure, the benefit of the federal structure to the people. There is a resistance. What we need to now examine is within Oromia, within the Oromo government, what is preventing them from really addressing the Oromo question? How does that prevent them? What is preventing them, essentially? And what we have seen today, that question that was raised by the Oromo Orthodox Church is basically the same question throughout. You can take that question and ask it in the business sector, ask it in other institutions. You basically have a duplicate of similar problem. One group monopolizing certain bureaucracy, one group doing something else, while the rest have not taken part in it. And so that's where the failure is. So what we need to do, in my view, the Oromo regional president, I welcome their initiative to take peace, to talk with Ola, to re-engage the Oromo public. But they have to take this in a serious matter, because there's a growing movement, there's growing pressure within the Oromo people to want their rights to be asserted. And that needs to be taken seriously. I'm not quite certain why they have not able to achieve this. There is a conflict between the federal government and the Oromo regional province. How much freedom the regional government has over the federal government, how much that power is demarcated, how much separation is there, that's not clear. But in this respect, we have to push individuals who are within Oromo regional government, who want peace, who want change, who want to address the Oromo question and advocate on that basis, I believe.
Yes, I think that's true. We need to promote the peace initiative. That's important. At the same time, the Oromia National Regional State should address the question of its people. By addressing that, particularly, they need to move back to the constitution itself, and that's the starting point as far as I'm concerned. Let's a bit move to issues that are related to Wallo. As we have indicated so far, there has been extensive and highly destructive as well as continued war in Oromia in general, and if we single out in the other parts of the nation, that's on Wallo and Wallo Oromos, there has been siege, targeted attacks and killings and perhaps property destructions. How do you see this, and why is this ruthless kind of attack, and by whom?
Well, it's what the root problem of that is what we call the Amara nationalism is the expansion. It's land-based. They want, it's a territorial claim. They want to expand. This is the difference now in the last, when the Oromo youth started to demand for constitutional right and to be respected, the other side, especially the Amara nationalism, is based on territorial expansion. What they want to do is expand. And you can see claims in many various areas. In Western Tigray is being claimed by this group, and other Oromia cities are being boldly claimed by this group. And what they want to do with Wallo is actually is the fact that it's Oromo. They want to push it, or they want to remove the Oromo identity from that region. That is the true movement that we have seen. We have gotten a report from the ground. What is happening? There's war in Wallo region. The only thing is that that group exists in the Amara region, and they want to push these people out somehow, some way, by force or by other means. And so they declared war, and this war on Wallo has been going on for a very long time. There's always been instigation, and they blame that instigation on Ola and other organizations, but the facts on the ground doesn't show that. The civilians in Wallo are being attacked by an organized group that's coming from Amara nationalist or from Amara regional state, and the Amara regional state needs to really protect those other nationalities that live within the Amara region, including the Wallo people, and take responsibility and defend them from these attacks. And so that is where it is. At the same time, we asked the Oromo regional government and the federal government to intervene and prevent this kind of attack from occurring.
Thank you. With that, we'll be moving to the most sensitive issue currently happening in Oromia, and there are aggressive droughts, and I don't know if we call that famine or starvation prevailing in the entire region, Borana, Guji, Bali lowlands, Harar, Southwest RC, and so on. Particularly what we have been observing in Borana now currently is very touching. For about over 3 million cattle were died, and people are suffering a lot. How do you see this, and what do you advise perhaps the Oromo people, the government and the international community in this regard, because things are getting serious?
Right. I would start that before anything, the Oromo people come together and be there for one another at this critical time, especially in the area, in the Borana area, where the famine have hit people very severely. And so I would call upon Oromo people to contribute whatever they can at this point in time. This is what being a nation means. When there's a national crisis, we stand together. When there's a national victory, we celebrate together. And this is the time for Oromo people to come. Even though the government have been unresponsive, even unable to acknowledge the crisis in the region, we first have to come together and, contribute at this point whatever amount that we can, and also call upon international communities for assistance while this climate change, I believe, is for the last 4 or 5 years, the climate in the region have been changing. And so at this point in time, the Borona region is the hardest hit because drought, rain was not coming at the seasonal time. And so livestock have been affected and people are highly been impacted by this. So at this point, we genuinely need to stand with one another. Once we do that, and then we can push the government to really acknowledge that there is famine, acknowledge there's problem, and push the government to also ask NGOs to come in and help and assist. And going forward, what at the root of this is that the lack of democracy and stability in the region. A lot of resources that could have been used now to reach our people have not been used. They went to war. There's conflict in the region. So as a nation, when a crisis like this happens, we're not able to address it because when there's an authoritarian, a dictatorship in power, this is the result. Society suffers, people suffer, innocent people get in the way. This is why we call for genuine democracy and federalism in the region. Had that been the case, then today we can quickly respond. So I ask all, it's really dire. This is Oromia region have not suffered this kind of catastrophe before, and now we are seeing this. And the neglect that had come from, there were reports that were going to the government. The government have been aware of this for several months and years. They have been unresponsive, and we need to hold them accountable and say, you need to act very quickly. We need to organize. If you can organize a military in short time and go attack a region, I think you can organize a response group that would reach and assist the Oromo region.
That's really moving. The government could have done a lot of things, and still the situation is not open to the public. Media is not covering that, and the attention given by the government to that destructive drought and the starvation is the other fallacy is, I need your comment on that actually. The government is claiming exporting wheat abroad, and while citizens are suffering because of absence of food.
Right.
How do you see that fallacy, if you like?
This is where we really, to begin with, you see, Ethiopia could not have afforded any war. Already, our economy, the Ethiopian economy, was in shambles even before this crisis had occurred. Okay, and our export is very low. Now, on top of that, you start a major regional war that have taken the food and butter of the Ethiopian people and bought weapons with it, bought military infrastructure with it. Now, what had happened is a lot of those foreign exchange is low. What the government is trying to do is, because of the Ukraine war, the wheat circulation around the globe has probably decreased, and they want to sell wheat to the outside world, get a currency exchange, a dollar exchange, at the expense of their own population. So I believe that is the calculation from the top. They're only concerned about their power base or what the military structure or the dollar value. I think that's the calculation. The fallacy is that you have starving people in your own backyard that needed this wheat, that needed these breads on a daily basis, and yet we are exporting it. And this is totally not right. And history is testament to that. That was the beginning of the downfall of Haile Selassie when he had denied the starvation in Wallo. And also Mengistu had denied when there was a catastrophe in northern Ethiopia about starvation, and that had devastating consequence. And this is also, the Prime Minister really needs to take a quick action and not ignore this problem, address this, and not really make this a political game. This is a genuine problem in the country that would would impact not only Oromia region now, because the Oromia region is the most productive region. Unless we address this right away, the consequence will be much greater. It would impact, including the capital city and other regions of Ethiopia. So it's a fallacy. I don't understand how a government could export wheat when his population is starving. And we need to really enforce the government, maybe a letter to the government, campaign to not export those wheats, but save our people first.
Thanks so much. I think they need to address, it should be their priority. And finally, from my side, I would like to capitalize on the need by the Oromia national government to address the question of its own people, the question of the Oromo people. In fact, the nation itself should respond to the question of nations, nationalities, instead of working against that, and particularly the Oromia regional state should be itself by now, should stand by itself, should be itself, and act accordingly. Otherwise, the contradiction of Oromia national regional state is not with section of population or those who really openly fight. It's with the entire population, because it has been doing everything against the interest of the Oromo people. That's my own reflection. And if you have final remark, it's time for you in a split of seconds, please, Dr.
Absolutely. Well, the question that's been raised by the Oromos is not an impossible question. It's a simple democratic question. Now, if I were the Oromia regional president or government, what I would quickly do is make a final rule with the working language of the federal state. That's the first thing. Allow human rights to respect the human right of the Oromo people, end the war in Oromia region, make peace with the rest of the political parties, whoever that's there, the OLF, OFC, OLA, all of these things. This is an urgent time. If they take time and not address this in a very short time, the consequence would be grave to the Oromo regional president and even the Oromo regional state. But they have to take this very quickly. And what they need to realize is now the international community has focused on Oromia region and looking at the peace and stability in the region. And one of the factors is that the Oromia regional president or government needs to take peace seriously, because of Oromia is not a peace, Ethiopia is not a peace, and the consequence of international going against the international community will be dire.
Thanks so much, as usual, Dr. Ebisa. With this, we conclude our discussion with Dr. Ebisa today. For those of you who have a vision, professional critics, and hopes, please, the door is open. My name is Hussein. You can contact me through my Facebook. Dr. Ebisa, again, profoundly thank you for your reflections. This is the future of Africa. In this program, we focus on Horn of Africa's political, economic, and socio-cultural aspects. Let's share our vision, hopes, and professional critics. All views are esteemed. Stay with us.